Good evening from Raleigh, North Carolina at approximately 9:10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on this Tuesday, September the 4th, 2018. And the top story right now is Tropical Storm Gordon teetering on the brink of hurricane strength as it approaches its imminent landfall in around the Alabama-Mississippi border on the Gulf Coast. And still keeping an eye out on Hurricane Florence. Now, yesterday was Tropical Storm Florence, but it's now strengthened into a hurricane. And keeping an eye on that, but the main story is Tropical Storm Gordon as it approaches its landfall in the next few hours, probably just before or very close to midnight tonight, making its landfall. And once again, no threat to North Carolina whatsoever. It's just important to know what's going on with the weather around you. So not much going on in North Carolina right now except hot and muggy. So kind of interesting to look at what else is going on. And as our friends down in southern Mississippi and southern Alabama deal with a wet and stormy night tonight with Tropical Storm Gordon making its landfall. So taking a look at the lower level water vapor here, it looks pretty disheveled. There was a big explosion of kind of water vapor up here. I guess if I switch this to long wave, it might be a little easier to point out some features here. But yeah, here we go. So we had this big explosion of convection earlier today, and it was looking, kind of healthy. It's it doesn't really look like a tropical system. Yesterday there was a bit more of a swirl, but it's kind of looking a little bit disheveled because it's dealing with some shear, especially up in this area. So as the sun set, you can see some of the convection kind of died down, and it also just this looks like a mess. But we'll switch over to the radar view in a second. You can clearly see, it still has the banding and the swirl feature of a tropical system like you'd expect. But this just goes to show that as it's approaching land, it's kind of seeing some frictional shear from the land, and also just kind of struggling to hold itself together, which is certainly good news because that means a weaker wind system. But the rainfall, unfortunately, is still a threat. Even if it's downgraded to a tropical depression, the rain is going to remain, and that usually is the biggest problem with these systems. So the rainfall is certainly going to be the big story with Tropical Storm Gordon. Luckily, it is pretty fast moving, so that should not be a huge issue. But to flip over to the radar view here, I'll pull up radar scope, and on this left panel here, you're seeing your classic radar reflectivity, the warmer colors indicating heavier rain, and then over here, we are looking at velocity. So I'm actually going to take velocity off for a second and just focus on here, and this is the National Weather Service radar site out of Mobile, Alabama, and if I can animate this here, let's see if I can get this. We animate this, and you can clearly see, the rotation here. You see, the spiraling feature, and the center of Tropical Storm Gordon, center of circulation. Now, this is not necessarily an eye. It's not a cleared out eye. It's just a center of circulation. And landfall is, declared. Landfall occurs when the center of circulation crosses over land. So it's not landfall when the edge of this, approaches. It's got to be when the center of circulation, as marked by the National Weather Service, as marked by, the official track of the storm, crosses over land. So, if we measure this, the center, somewhere down here, it's kind of hard to approximate, but there are some barrier islands here in Mississippi and South Carolina, Dauphin Island and Petit Bois Island over here, Horn Island. Up this way, it may very well cross over one of those barrier islands and make an official landfall, go back over, the bay here, and then make a landfall in the mainland U.S., near Pascagoula, up here in southern Mississippi, or even parts of Alabama. It's made a kind of a northward jog in its track, so it's interesting to see where exactly it's going to end up. But obviously these areas getting a ton of rain right now. These are your tropical rains out here. Maybe not so quite as intense, but Dauphin Island right now and Gulf Shores earlier Gulf Shores was getting some heavier rain. But you can see the genesis of some of these new rain bands as it's feeding off of that Gulf moisture and tapping into that really warm water. So a very wet night and very windy night ahead for these folks here. And as we go forward, the main impact from this is going to mainly be the rain up into south central Alabama and up through Mississippi tomorrow. So going back, I saw a good graphic on Twitter that I wanted to share, just to kind of package together all the impacts from Tropical Storm Gordon. And this was from, I believe, the National Weather Service in Mobile, Alabama. I may be mistaken on that, but it's from a National Weather Service forecast office. And I thought it was a pretty neat graphic, very clean looking. So the shaded area here is the forecast cone. I took this offline a little bit earlier, so the track is pretty much closer to here. But the same thing stands with storm surge warning, storm surge watch, and flash flood watch. I'm not sure if the hurricane warning has been dropped yet. I know that it's still attainable to get hurricane strength, but the main story, is certainly, whether it's a hurricane or not, the main story is storm surge and flash flooding. So you have that storm surge being, the inland push of seawater inland where you actually have, inundation of salt water, and that ruins a lot of infrastructure, and that salt content in the water makes the flooding even worse because it erodes things and it's very damaging to low-lying areas. Hopefully that will just be limited to, some overwash on some coastal highways and not get into any, any homes. Gordon's not a very large system, so, storm surge is usually a factor, or a function, I should say, of the size of the storm. So with Gordon being fast moving and a smaller storm, that's certainly good news, because those are two things that minimize the impact of the storm surge. If it was a bigger storm and it was moving a lot slower, storm surge would be a huge concern, and it still is. It's a life-threatening, phenomenon that's caused by these storms, but it looks like the impacts will be kept pretty minimal from this storm, thanks to, the factors coming together to keep it at bay intensity-wise. But there is a chance that it reaches hurricane strength before landfall. I don't personally, just throwing my 2 cents in there, I don't personally think it'll get to hurricane strength, just because it's having such a hard time with the wind shear and with the daytime convection, or the daylight going away, sun going away, and the convection kind of weakening. It does look a little bit more organized than it did earlier today, but I think it's just going to be on that brink of hurricane strength, but it's going to make landfall as a tropical storm. So we will see about that, and that's always kind of interesting to see, how storms interact with land as they're getting closer. But I think it'll just be on the edge. But regardless, if you have any loved ones in this area, make sure that they're aware of the situation. If they're not by now, that they're in for a wet and stormy night, and that especially coastal communities have the biggest risk with that storm surge. And just to kind of continue on that rainfall, not a lot of prolific rain amounts yet, but that'll most likely change as some of these tropical bands kind of get and start training over the same areas. If we zoom in here, I didn't want to zoom in that much, but over here, Pensacola is in this area. We have Fort Walton Beach down here. Freeport. Over here, Mobile's up in this area, Pascagoula's down here. The Barrier Islands don't really show up here, but they've picked up, about 1.5 inches. And then over east of Pensacola, 1.5 to 2.5 inches. So not extreme amounts of rainfall that you'd expect out of a tropical system, but this is just observed, valid through, this is actually valid through, earlier today. So this doesn't even reflect the most current rainfall, which I'm going to show you in just a second. But this kind of shows you just the general pictures, or the general areas that have had the most rainfall today so far. And then going through the State Climate Office of North Carolina site, you can pull up this map which shows you a whole array of stations, and the current numbers that you're seeing here. And for reference, here's Mobile, here's Pensacola, here is Northwest Florida right here, Pascagoula down here, Dauphin Islands up here, and the storm is currently centered right around this area. But we can look at and see, just 1.19 inches, 0.97 inches. I mean, that's typical rain you pick up in a thunderstorm. Not to discount that, but it's not, flooding rain by any means. But that will very likely change overnight as these bands here get on shore, and these, same areas. Pensacola is kind of getting hammered right now with this heavier rain, and will probably pick up several inches as we continue into tonight. So that is the rainfall situation. And then as far as the wind, we'll take a look at the wind speed. Bowie out here reported a sustained wind speed of 40 miles per hour. These are not gusts; these are sustained wind speeds. Pretty breezy in Mobile with 23 mile per hour winds, 20 mile per hour sustained winds, and gust I'm not going to really show you, because wind gusts, it's a confusing thing to think about. I'll show you wind gusts here briefly. These are the highest winds that are observed, with these. This is hourly data, so within the hour, gusts up to 30. But the main damage usually comes when you have your bigger gust of wind, so that's important to look at too. But a lot of people often take wind gust data and say that that's the wind speed, and that's incorrect. This is just an instantaneous thing. When you see maximum sustained winds at 70 miles per hour, that means that you can expect winds to be sustained at 70 miles per hour. That's not what it's going to be all the time, but just be sure when you're looking at the legend of information that it's sustained wind versus wind gusts, because a lot of people will take wind gust data and redistribute that data, I guess, as wind speed, and that is not correct. So just be sure you're aware of that. But that is pretty much the situation on Gordon right now, and as we kind of continue through the night, we'll watch to see if that makes landfall. But I wanted to touch briefly on Hurricane Florence once again. So it has intensified out here in the open Atlantic. Current winds of 85 miles per hour, and here is the forecast cone. So there's still a lot of uncertainty beyond this track here, but it is expected to remain it actually wasn't expected to become a hurricane, because it's dealing with some pretty rough conditions that I'll share with you in a second. But it is going to maintain that strength and probably weaken a little bit as it encounters some wind shear and deals with some, Saharan dust from the Sahara. And as it goes out here, a lot of uncertainty remains. I would show you the spaghetti model plots that, where you see all the lines going everywhere, but it's just kind of a mess right now, and there's not really a point in showing that because it's got to get to this point before it's even, we can even think about that. Otherwise, it's just a forecast that's not realistic outside of 5 days. So, this is getting into the storm being here around Sunday, so that's still several days away. When it gets here, then we'll have a much better idea if it is going to recurve out to sea like most storms do, or on the off chance that it comes and wants to recurve and do, it wants to do all kinds of loops out here, and the models want to take it all over the place. But the most likely scenario, just based on climatology and based on what the large scale pattern is going to happen. We talked about yesterday this ridge being here, kind of being an open door, but there is going to be a disturbance that comes through and hopefully pushes it out to sea. So that's something we have to look at. It's really hard for storms to avoid that, but the intensity and the overall size and strength of Hurricane Florence is also a big key in that. So we just have to wait and see for a few days. Focus on Tropical Storm Gordon, the problem at hand, and then for Hurricane Florence, we'll wait and see over the next couple of days how that evolves. And just quickly wanted to show that. I'm looking here, our friend here, we can look at the shear and kind of the things going on. So it's a Category 1 hurricane right now. It's expected to weaken back into a storm. That's what that symbol means. So we can overlay the shear. And anywhere you see this red color, that's unfavorable shear for the storm and means that it's, pretty harsh conditions for it to exist in. So it somehow managed to fight off that earlier today and got into an area now where it's being a lot more heavily sheared, and it's probably going to kind of tear the storm apart just a little bit and weaken it, and hopefully it stays weaker and goes out that way. But being weaker down the road may be a play into how it interacts with a cold front coming, or not a cold front, but a disturbance coming off of the mainland U.S. So there's so many factors of the forecast, and we just have to wait and see. But for now, you can expect Florence to kind of stay at that Category 1 hurricane strength. And I think that is all I had for this video. Looking here, once again, just to kind of leave you on this forecast cone. I guess I could show you the satellite imagery so it's still way out here. If I animate this, here's a coast of Africa, still way out in the Atlantic. That's where we have so much time to track this. You can clearly see, this is the hurricane. It's trying to, it looked pretty good earlier today. Had, pretty intense water vapor. It's fighting all that dust around it, but it certainly stands out. And there's other waves down here that actually have chances to develop as well. So it's the peak of the season. It's going to stay active, with our H named storms and I named storms, which would be Helene and Isaac, I believe, would be the next name. So it's going to continue on that track, and it's going to be active. So we just have to keep an eye. Tis the season for tropical activity. So we have to keep an eye on that. But I will leave you with this image tonight with the radar of Tropical Storm Gordon approaching landfall, and I'll be probably staying up to see where exactly it makes landfall, and hopefully that the impacts are minimized, and we'll see what happens. But overall, impact should be pretty kept to a minimum just because of the storm strength, but it's certainly not anything to underestimate. No tropical system is anything to underestimate, with rain being a big deal. But I will keep you posted on that. I'll be tweeting out some information. Twitter's a little bit faster to get information out in little tidbits. I might do a couple of Facebook posts, and it looks like they just posted a flood warning as I was doing this video. So that was a pretty good timing. Yeah, a flash flood warning expires in 6 hours. So that's exactly what these people are dealing with tonight. They deal with those life-threatening flash flooding conditions. So we will keep an eye on that. And if you have any friends or family in Pensacola, Gulf Shores, Alabama, Mobile, just be sure they're aware of the conditions and be sure that they are staying safe and that they are prepared for a wet and stormy night. So until the next time, stay safe. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me on Facebook or send me a message on Twitter. And leave a comment on this video on YouTube if you have any comments. But other than that, I will see you in the next video. All right, stay safe.